Hi everyone, welcome to our video. We're very fortunate to be here with the author of our latest manual publication, Canon Dr Andrew Smith, and the title of our manual is called How to Run Online Dialogue. In the previous years, we have published dialogue manuals, from things like open mosque manuals to how to do speed dialogue, and this is an exact continuation, but it's something that was kind of inspired from those, and also by some unique contributions of Andrew, who's here with us today. So Andrew, thank you for being here with us.
Pleasure. Good to be with you.
Thank you. If I could just go straight into the first question then. So what was the inspiration for the manual? Where did it come from, and what was the kind of back context of it?
Well, it was one of those things that came out of the pandemic where suddenly we couldn't meet in person, and a number of folk started doing interfaith dialogue meetings online and using things like Zoom and Teams and Google Meet and things. And we're all learning as we were going along. Very few of us had run events online before. And so we were making it up as we went along, and we learned some things. But actually, even though the pandemic has finished and we're able to meet in person again, it's become apparent that lots of people have found that that way of meeting is also really useful. And so what we wanted to do was gather together some wisdom from people who over the last couple of years have run a lot of meetings online. So we talked to a lot of people, got some best practice, got some tips, got some ideas, and put them all together so that if people are thinking, how do I run something online? Or I've done a few, but I'm not sure they're going well. How can I make it better? Then there's a whole load of practical tips there, but have all come from people who have done it themselves, who have been leading these kind of meetings. So before, it was almost exclusively meeting in person. We would find venues, either that was hiring or using somewhere, send out invitations, people would book and come, and some people would not turn up and all those things, but it was very much face to face. And all the literature on interfaith dialogue has presumed that you're meeting in a room. So there are lots of guides. The Dialogue Society has produced some good ones, and there are lots of other books about interfaith dialogue, but they all start from the assumption that you're sitting in a room together. And then obviously during lockdown, during the hard lockdowns, we couldn't do that at all. So some people didn't do anything, but a number of us tried to say, can we do this online? Can we at least meet and do something? And then how can we get dialogue going when only one person can talk at a time? All you're seeing is people's heads. Sometimes people haven't got their cameras on. A whole load of stuff. But also some new possibilities. So suddenly you had people joining from different countries because, well, why not? They were awake, they had the internet on. Why not join? It costs nothing. So suddenly you had different issues happening in the meetings. And the guide tries to pick up some of those issues that crop up that make an online meeting very different, about who turns up, about the fact that people can be there with their cameras turned off, or that people can take a screenshot without anybody knowing and then share a picture of the meeting, which in a face-to-face meeting you couldn't do. So that was the kind of then, and now we're in this place where people are finding that yes, it's lovely to meet again, but that actually when you meet online, particularly in the winter, that includes a lot more people because people don't like going out when it's dark and wet. Again, it includes people from all sorts of different locations, and for some people who just because of life's issues for whatever reason find it very hard.
Andrew, did you touch upon this sort of? I mean, I was planning on asking about like gender dynamics, so women who are on maternity leave or pregnant, and you haven't mentioned that in the.
I think that's a really interesting point you raise about gender, particularly. A number of folk found during the pandemic that the number of women involved in dialogues increased. And women who, for family reasons, found it very hard to get out in the evenings or during the day were able to be included. And we also found there was something around people who perhaps feel intimidated in a group, who aren't used to being in a meeting and sitting in a room with 20 other people being asked to share their own thoughts, find that intimidating. Found that sitting on their own sofa with a cup of tea in their hands, actually it was a much more comfortable setting to be in. And so we found that the level of engagement, the kind of contributions you could get, even though it was a bit stilted with the screen and everything, you actually got some really deep stuff happening and people sharing things that they probably wouldn't have done if they'd been sat in a room having to look at all the other people. So it did raise that thing. And also it raised a really interesting thing for some people is it was much easier to leave the meeting if it got uncomfortable. You just click your button, no one even knows you've just gone. Whereas actually to get up and walk out of a room, that takes a lot of courage. That's a really big thing. That's a statement. Actually, to just click leave on your button, no one knows. So it gave some people that security that they could, if you like, try it out a bit, dip their toe in the water. And I think particularly for some women for whom this is, it's an intimidating or challenging environment. It's been a really useful, helpful way for them to get involved.
Did you notice any different dynamics or shifts in youth participation at all?
Yeah, so we talked to people from a couple of youth organisations, but particularly the Feast, who do a lot of this work, and they did a lot of work online during the pandemic. So they shifted their work there. What they found, of course, was the young people, on the whole, were much more comfortable meeting online. Certainly when the pandemic started, and I talked to my lad about being on Zoom meetings, and my lad's in his 20s, he just went, well, welcome to my world. That's what life is like. Is online gaming and has done for years. So there was a dynamic of, yeah, this is just normal. And interestingly, when we talk to people, the older people, the older generation talked about wanting to get back to real life, as if meeting in person is real and meeting online isn't real. The young people never made that distinction. And when young people who had met only online met in person, it was a kind of seamless transition. Whereas older people, it was a much bigger jump between the online that was perceived as second best, unreal, it'll do for now. Although they begun to see the benefits of it, young people, it tended to be, well, this is what we've just been doing. It just carries on seamlessly and it's just as real as meeting in person, and don't necessarily feel the need to meet you in person. So there was a definite distinction. Quite where that age kind of changes, probably kind of under 30, but certainly under 25, who have kind of lived very much in this way. So yeah, big difference. And also just to touch on that, one of the other things we found is there's a presumption about the sort of digital divide. Those who can get online, and it's often presumed to be the kind of the elderly who find meeting online difficult, and that can be the case. Although we had a number of folk kind of in their 70s and 80s joining in on interfaith dialogues, and a number of young people who actually can't afford the data. They might have got a phone, but they've got very limited data. And so therefore, to choose to spend an hour of your data on an interfaith meeting is quite a big cost. Whereas for those of us who've got work machines or just endless Wi-Fi, actually it makes no difference. So there was something there about some young people finding actually it is costly, the amount of data it uses. So that was something we picked up as well.
And I think in that perhaps we've got the age gap, which will make a difference whether they're working or not. And also, interfaith indirectly also suggests the kind of intercultural, and then within that you have different class dynamics. So if we're talking about a Muslim community, we're predominantly talking about a working class community, and then you have the kind of economic differences and things that would also contribute to that. So it's the online world may not just be as simple as going online as a lot of us youth think.
Can I just speak about, because there's a really good point you made, because actually the other thing was people's confidence to have their cameras on was not just about seeing themselves, but it was about what other people might see. So you can see I've got pictures on my wall. I'm quite happy for you to see those pictures. Actually, for some people, they find that they're embarrassed about the accommodation they're in. They know that there'll be brothers and sisters or whoever in the background. They feel uncomfortable sharing that. So whilst they might be happy for themselves to be seen, it's actually the background, it's their home life that they might feel embarrassed about, might feel awkward about, that we need to bear in mind. Although you can blur the background or change the background, helping people negotiate that before they've logged on or things to make sure they feel comfortable is also important in that kind of socio-economic kind of difference.
Yeah, and I think that was something that this theme of there being other people around and the socioeconomic dynamics if you're living in an intergenerational household and how you can navigate that and things. I remember reading during the pandemic, people who are perhaps first or second generation, just finished university, going into interviews in their kitchen where their mum's preparing food in their room because they share a bedroom with two other siblings, and you've got a lot of different dynamics going on. So it's definitely an interesting one, which I think we'll see shape and unravel as this new normal and our online world continues. I mean, we did speak about some challenges, but what other challenges did you identify? Were there any that you thought were just very difficult to overcome?
One of the challenges is people sign up to come and then just don't turn up because actually it's just a Zoom meeting. Oh, actually, tea's overrun. Oh, I can't be bothered this evening. So the dropout rate of people who say they're going to come and don't turn up is really high. So that's one challenge, and also people just forget. So in the guide, I've put remind, send emails out with the link the week before, the day before, on the day with half an hour to go. And the challenge of running the meeting, you do need ideally a co-host who can do all the tech stuff, because whilst you're trying to introduce the topic or do something, you'll have people texting going, I can't find the link, I'm in the waiting room, how do I get in? And having someone else to kind of manage that. Then some of the other challenges, obviously, in a sense, anyone can turn up. So do you know who's entering? So having some kind of registration system. But you do need to be conscious of that. And so in the guide, we talk about kind of security, knowing how to mute people if you need to. What will you do if someone starts putting offensive images up? And increasingly, the software is very good at helping you manage that. One of the challenges is the software keeps updating. So as people doing this, we need to regularly just check that we're still aware of how do you make someone leave the meeting or just shut down the meeting. And as I said, some of those security measures have improved, but they've changed. So that also needs managing in a way that wouldn't happen in a face-to-face meeting, or very unlikely to, but certainly not in the same way. And there are just some things about protocols that you need to help people with, because people can do things like, you could say it's a confidential meeting, but actually, if someone stood, if someone was just to the right of me here in my room, no one would know, and they could be listening in, making notes, passing me little things to say. That changes the meeting. So that needs a little bit of just saying to folk, it's only for the people who are in front of the screen. Asking people not to take screenshots, as I've already mentioned. You can photograph people without them knowing it, which you couldn't do in a meeting. So there's some things there about challenges about how you manage the meeting, as well as the challenges of, only one people speaking at a time. And I always encourage people, two things to help the conversation flow. One is when you're trying to have a conversation is to get everyone to unmute themselves. Even that can be a bit noisy. It means the conversation stands a chance of flowing. That endless, you're still muted, just disrupts everything. And also for some people, you can turn on a lot of the software, you can turn your own camera off so you can't see yourself. People find it very distracting looking at themselves in a meeting, which obviously face to face we don't do. So some little sort of challenges like that. And I think the challenge of just kind of managing kind of that kind of, particularly if you've got a screen where you've got a meeting where there's more than one screen of people. So we try and keep it, we often say in a dialogue, and we put this in the guide, try and keep it to about 20 people, because then you can see everybody if you're on something like Zoom. If you've got more than one screen, you do need to kind of be flicking between screens to make sure you can see everybody. How engaged are people? Is everyone okay? So there are some new challenges and some new kind of issues that come up around kind of power and those things, which we can discuss if you want to.
I was just wondering about the kind of quality of the dialogue. I mean, the interfaith community, you'd be able to do in-person visits to places like places of worship, and you get to see people, observe prayer or other kind of things in temples, synagogues, churches, mosques, wherever it is. You'd be able to get together in a park and do an interfaith walk. You'd share a meal together. I mean, those sort of very physical things. Are you able to share to an extent online? I mean, how does the online interfaith work?
And that's a really good point, because obviously in one sense, a lot of those things obviously you can't do, and that's one of the things that came up is that you miss all that little informal chatting at the start of a meeting when you get to a room and you're having a coffee and you chat to a few folk. And what I like to say to folk is encourage people to log in a few minutes early, because as the host, you can have a little bit of that conversation, not very much, but you can encourage a little bit of that, because that's one of the things you miss. And so, yes, you can't do that physical being together, seeing your place of worship. But as a few people pointed out, in other ways, you see other parts. So actually, you now know that I quite like modern art because you can see what's behind me. Actually, if we met in a hall, you would never know that. Actually, if you see a child coming in the room, we actually enter into people's homes. If people are happy to have their cameras on, we actually enter into each other's lives and homes in a different way. So there's something there about actually we get to know each other in some ways deeper. So there is a kind of that bit that's different that can be really good. And I think one of the challenges is helping the conversations to flourish is much harder work on Zoom, or it's a different skill than doing it in person. It needs really well thinking out beforehand, we've learnt. And a number of people said this, that online is unforgiving. A 20-second or a 30-second pause in a room while you sort the tech out, people kind of, are okay and do that. Online, that feels like forever. It just goes on and on and on. It's really unforgiving. But when it's done well, people do share well, and people talked about being emotional, about being really challenged in their faith. And I've already talked about people sharing things that perhaps they wouldn't if they were in a room full of people. And there was this sense that it could generate not just genuine discussion, but a genuine meeting of hearts and minds, as well as just a kind of cognitive thinking, I've got some ideas. It did get people emotionally, it did get people spiritually engaged. So we did things like sharing silence together, because that can be very powerful. When you're in a room together or a place of worship and you sit in silence for a couple of minutes, that's often very powerful. But one of the things we learned was, if you want to share silence online, you actually need people to be unmuted. Not if everyone mutes themselves, you're just all separated. It's like being in separate rooms. When you're together and you're all unmuted in silence, you hear the door in another room, you hear the breathing, but that's what silence is. And that actually equally can be very powerful. And we did that with people holding up little candles. And so those things can be very emotionally engaging online, but they need thinking about. And hopefully this guide will help people think about that. Getting music kind of queued up so it's really easy to share, and practicing sharing screens so you know how to do it really easily. All those things help the dialogue to flow more easily. But it can be there, but obviously it misses a lot of that physical stuff that you talked about. On the other hand, you can sit in a place of worship and say, hey, look, here it is, and I'll hold my phone up or whatever and walk round with you. And again, that could be a place of worship anywhere in the world. So it opens up those possibilities in a different way.
That wasn't something that I was expecting. I thought visiting a sort of temple or a different form of a different religion's place of worship would have a kind of in-depth experience, which it does. But like you said, seeing the modern art behind you, I'm not in my house, but if I was, I would have Klimt up. And then we could, have a very unique discussion that most likely if I was visiting your church or if you were visiting my local mosque, we wouldn't have. Which is unique and deep in the sense that it's a more human interaction.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. It definitely wasn't something that I'd thought of. So we spoke about the weaknesses a bit. That kind of came to the contrary. We spoke about some strengths as well. But are there any particular strengths of online dialogue that you think really were a highlight for you?
I think for a lot of people, it's just really convenient. So people do join in when they wouldn't if it was in person. So we did some dialogues earlier this year. We're going to repeat them in January. And I know the group, if I said, let's all meet in the city centre of Birmingham, hardly anyone would turn up. Actually, they'll give an hour online to do some scriptural discussions and to do some dialogue. That's going to work. So just from a practical work, and it's as long as you've got the internet and some kind of computer, it's free. You don't have to hire a room. Whilst it's fun sharing refreshments, someone has to pay for them. actually, so from just a practical point of view, it increases access and it makes it much easier for people. And I do think this issue of the inclusion, people who can't come out can be included, is a really significant thing. People with disabilities of some description who can't get out, people with family life unable to be there. Another thing that someone commented on, particularly if you're using software like Zoom, particularly, or I think Google Meet, is that all the boxes are the same size. It has a very democratizing effect that if you're a bishop or a mum or a dad or a young person, whoever you are, or an imam or a priest, you still get the same size box. You don't get a bigger one because you've got doctor in your title or bishop or something. You still get the same size box. And so actually everyone sits in the meeting much more equal. And if people haven't got their titles up, you might not know that that person is the Grand Mufti or anybody. So they become it's much more human, in that sense, a much more human encounter. And that sense of being equal, and not having anyone kind of more important than others visually like that. Someone else commented, it's great because everyone has their names written up. So if you're really, like me, really bad at remembering people's names, there they are, and you can read them, which it's just a lovely little extra, which I'd not thought about until someone said it, and I thought, you're right, you do get to know people's names better. So I think those things, as we've talked about, that sense of the way it can be more inclusive, I think is really significant, and therefore I think worth continuing with, even though the meeting in person, is great fun.
Thank you, Andrew. Just to sort of wrap up, I mean, we had that period in the pandemic where it was just all online. Now we're in a new normal. We're going hybrid, sometimes all exclusive in person or online. What do you think about the future of online dialogue? I mean, is this guide just a beginning to something which you think will continue and needs to continue in sort of its research and depth?
I think you're right. I think it is the start. I think people will continue to explore it. The software will develop. We'll find new ways of doing it. And I think one thing that came out very clearly was that online, when everyone's online, it works well. When everyone's in a room, it works well. When you try and have a dialogue with some people in the room and some people online, that just doesn't work. If you're live streaming a meeting so people can watch it and type in comments, that works. But to try and have a dialogue with 3 people in a room and 3 people online or whatever, that really is really hard to make that work, because inevitably one group feel a bit left out because you're talking mostly to the other group. I think one of the things that we have learned, though, is that live streaming meetings, so people can, so essentially it's a meeting for the people in the room, but that it is made available online for anybody else if they want to. That's become a much more kind of acceptable thing to do, and I think that's also part of the future, is how we do that so people can join in much easier. Even if they're not able to join the dialogue, they can at least listen in, they can type in comments, they can be present in that sense. And I think the research, so alongside this how-to guide, I've been working with the Dialogue Society and Dilwar Hussain from Coventry University. We've been doing a whole load of research in not just the how-to as to how you do this, but some of the stuff we've talked about today. What actually happens when you meet online? Is this a genuine meeting? And that's going to, we've got 2 journal articles we've submitted, so hopefully they'll be published soon. But I think that research into what is this meeting? In what way are we actually meeting at the moment? One of the little things that came up actually as a challenge is the images that get placed next to each other. And it was a Sikh friend of mine who raised this issue when I asked him to be present at something. He said, but if I put up some passages from the Guru Granth Sahib from our scripture in my, sharing that screen, but another person somewhere at the meeting is drinking a glass of wine while they're in the meeting because they're sat at home and it's all relaxing. If on someone's screen those 2 images are next to each other, for some people that is deeply problematic, to put the sacred scripture alongside alcohol. Now, yes, they might be 100 miles apart, but on someone's screen, they might be next to each other. And that's problematic. And so there's a whole load of stuff there to reflect on as to what happens when we meet. The fact that everyone sees a different view of the meeting. No one's image of where all the people are is exactly the same. So actually, we're not actually all in the same meeting, because the algorithm moves around, but on some now, like Zoom, you can move the boxes around yourself. So some people might decide, well, I'm going to put all the Muslims on one side and all the Christians on the other side. Their view of the meeting would be radically different to mine. Some might put, I'll put all the women over here and all the men are. Do you know, you can manipulate it and no one would know, but you see the meeting in a particular way. And I think there's something quite interesting in what's happening when we are present in this way, more present than just virtually, more present than just by sending messages. We're not physically present, but actually what we see is radically different. In a room, I'm sitting on one side, I see you and the windows behind you, you're on the other side, you see me and the door behind me. We get a slightly different perspective, but we're in the same place. This way, and particularly if you've got more than one screen, even the people that you're looking at are different to the people I'm looking at, and yet we're both in the same meeting. And this really weird thing that if you have lots of people, several screens, maybe 100 people, everyone sees themselves on the first screen, but obviously not everyone's on the first screen because there's only 20 people there, but everyone sees themselves on that screen. So everyone has a radically different view of the meeting and who they see being present. So there's something still to dig into there, I think, to research what actually is happening in these meetings. So I think we're at the start of understanding this stuff. And as I say, all the research so far has presumed we're sat in the room together. And I think we need to encourage others to pick this up and keep digging into this and exploring in what ways is it authentic, in what ways are we meeting and being transformed, in what ways are all those the things that we look for in dialogue to be transformative, to be nourishing and nurturing, to be kind of challenging and whatever. In what ways do they happen? And are there other things happening online that we've not even thought about it yet?
There's definitely a lot that could be kind of problematized and looked into. So thank you for that. Again, some things that I hadn't thought of. But as you were talking, I mean, I realized we're always kind of discussing about those who are sort of pro-dialogue, those who would be the direct participants. But when we do things like stream our meetings live for all to see, we're also kind of increasing that transparency of people who perhaps had question marks about, well, what do people really do in this interfaith community? And I know, stereotypes from within the Muslim community is, oh, they're trying to convert you, or are you trying to convert them, or what really goes on, sort of thing. You've got that transparency for people to see what is really happening in the interfaith dialogue world. And it also comes with that some accountability, which I think is good. And it's, sort of regulated in a kind of indirect way by the public, which I think is nice in that sense as well. So there's definitely a lot more that we could look into. And I look forward to reading the articles that are hopefully going to come out soon, and also, the future of interfaith dialogue, and see how it all transpires. So thank you very much for being here with us, Andrew.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, just for those who are viewing, please do subscribe, like, share, and all the things that you would usually do. But yeah, thank you and take care.